Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Syria, a war economy. Money printed in Moscow, flown to Damascus. Who gets it? What's it spent on? And how long will it continue to support this regime? And as the recession drags on and unemployment soars, the banks get a lifeline. We talk to one of Spain's leading chief executives and ask, does the country need a bailout? Trying to understand what's going on inside Syria these days is difficult, to say the least. There is a devastating war going on. Independent journalists aren't allowed in, and for our purposes on this program, there's no official economic data. But what information we do have points to a war economy, money and food supplies being kept aside for the government, the army and its supporters. So we're going to try to pull together some of the information available to give us a slightly better picture this week. Before the crisis, the Syrian economy was worth about $60 billion. There used to be a budget deficit of between 3 and 5% of gross domestic product. But in 2013, the forecast is for a budget deficit of 745 billion Syrian pounds. That's about $10 billion, which is more than a sixth of GDP. And here's some other things we know from the budget unveiled by the finance minister, Mohammed Jalati. Next year's budget's actually been increased 4% to almost $20 billion. Public sector salaries will go up 13% in effort to keep things afloat, keep some people happy. And there'll be a 25% boost in subsidies on food, energy and agriculture. Trouble is, none of this takes into account Syria's plunging oil revenues. So we're going to discuss the ins and outs of a war economy in just a moment. First, though, this report from Kristen Salumi, based on documents obtained by Al Jazeera, which show who's been backing President Bashar al-Assad with the cash and how.
After nearly 2 years of conflict, Syria appears to have become a cash economy. And there seems to be no shortage of it, despite falling oil and tax revenues and rising costs. This may be why. Records obtained by the investigative website ProPublica document 8 flights between Moscow and Damascus. The cargo, Syrian banknotes. In total, 240 tons of them.
We're talking about billions of dollars going into being printed in a very short period of time. Most of the flights that we tracked occurred in a 2-week period at the beginning of September.
The Russian government will not confirm what was on board this Syrian plane, photographed by aviation enthusiasts in Moscow. But the date of the photos coincides with the date of the logs for the flights carrying the money.
So it's prolonging the longevity of this regime and its ability to survive. Financial aspects of that are very, very important because they essentially buy support. They can keep the military intact, keep its supply coming in somehow.
Records show the plane flew over Azerbaijan, Iran and Iraq, completely avoiding Turkish airspace. A former Russian diplomat says it was a perfectly legal business transaction.
The Security Council doesn't take any steps to blockade Syria economically. It is absolutely one-side decision of the United States, and some nations, some states joined these American efforts.
Syria's currency used to be printed in Austria, but European Union sanctions put an end to that deal.
I think we've been very clear, both publicly and privately, how we feel about any country, Russia included, supporting the Assad regime in any way.
The cost of goods are expected to increase with the infusion of new money. Inflation is already estimated to be between 40 and 65%. And as costs rise, it is the Syrian people, already suffering from the violence, who will feel the sanctions' impact.
The value and the purchasing power and the real incomes of Syrians will be just falling and falling and falling with these very high rates of inflation. And I presume from the opposition side of the Assad regime, they would be seeing that as hopefully domestic pressure on Assad to go as people's living conditions just take a turn for the worse.
Having a steady supply of cash will allow the Assad government to continue paying its workers, most crucially, its soldiers.
And then there's the flip side, people suffering from the war who really need the kind of money and support that the Syrian government appears to have. Because while there have been plenty of promises of aid from international donors, there's just not enough. Take Idlib province, which has seen its first delivery of aid, but as correspondent Sue Turton found out for herself there, it's just a trickle when a torrent is what's really needed.
Sugar, tea, baby formula and wheat. The first shipment of aid to get to the mountains of Idlib province since this conflict began. But it's a pitiful amount. 10,000 families live in this region, and another 8,000 who fled the bombing in Marat al-Nauman are also sheltering here.
We've heard a lot of promises from humanitarian organizations, and we believe these promises. But we haven't seen anything on the ground. We say to a world that claims to be democratic and cares about humanity, where are your principles now? They are worthless.
Dr. Hani Maroof collects some of the aid for his town.
How long will that keep a child with milk?
It depends on the age of the baby. If you're 10 days old, it's can for about 1 week.
He's also given money to buy children's medicines. According to the receipt, it was donated by France. He says they desperately need diesel for heating and to bake bread. Without these basics, people will die here this winter. That's if the government fighter jets circling overhead don't bomb their homes first. 2 days after we left, 4 rockets landed here. All the aid coming into Idlib province comes through the border crossing at Bab al-Hawa.
You'd expect a convoy of trucks carrying all sorts of aid, but so far it's been just a trickle. In fact, the Turkish government's disaster zone unit described the foreign aid donated so far as irrelevant and symbolic.
In one refugee camp close to the Turkish border, Ahmad Ibrahim has blood poisoning. He needs a transfusion every 10 days. The doctor's very little medicine or equipment to help boys like Ahmed or women like Latifa. She has breast cancer and desperately needs chemotherapy.
There's nowhere here. I can't afford to go to Turkey, and the road to Damascus is cut off.
The NGO Save the Children is warning of a $200 million shortfall, but that's just for refugees outside of Syria. For inside the country, the international community has pledged hundreds of millions of dollars, but only half the money has actually arrived.
About 208 organizations came here. They filmed and asked us questions. They left and we haven't seen or heard from them since. We have just a trickle of medicines.
Time is fast running out for thousands of Syrians. They've survived 20 months of conflict. Can they survive a winter with scarce heating, food and medicines?
So lots to discuss when it comes to the Syrian economy right now, and we're going to do that with Jihad Yazigi. He's joining us via Skype from Beirut, editor-in-chief of the Syria Report, which provides economic news and data on the country. And we thank you for your time. Take me back first, if you would, before the wars started. We're going back, the best part of 2 years now. What sort of state was the Syrian economy actually in back then? Was it strong? Was it self-reliant?
Well, the Syrian economy had been growing for several consecutive years at growth rates of around 4 to 5%, which is by Western standards very often estimated as a relatively good level of GDP growth. In practice, however, this growth was not sufficient to create enough employment for large segments of the population. It was an economy that was liberalizing, which was opening up to private investment, but unfortunately which was not caring enough to large segments of the population, in particular the segments of the population that live in the rural areas or in the suburbs of the large cities, exactly the same people who today are in the streets.
And how quickly, Jihad, did it fall apart, basically?
Well, the economy actually, one of the strengths of the Syrian economy is its diversity. It is an economy that has which has, a significant output in agriculture, in manufacturing, in the services sector, in oil, and so on and so forth. And this has helped the economy sustain itself for quite a long period of time. To this day, the fact that you have had 2 years of good crops has enabled the government to put a lid on inflation and to ensure relatively good supplies of food products in the major urban centers. So it's an economy that has, if you want, contracted gradually. Now we are starting to feel a much more severe impact, actually.
Yeah, well, tell me more about that severe impact and also how you get the information out, because information is very limited coming out of Syria.
Indeed, it is scarce. We haven't had any data published on any macroeconomic indicators since May 2011, except for inflation, actually. So we have no idea, for instance, of the level of foreign currency reserves. Basically, the economy has begun to deteriorate very seriously this summer. The expansion of violence to Damascus and then to the suburbs of Aleppo to Aleppo and to the suburbs of Damascus has led to a severe contraction in manufacturing output. Add to this the fact that the government has been spending most of its remaining reserves, apparently. The fact that you have had now 2 years in a row where you have no tourists, where you have no foreign investment, where you have no spending. So all of this all these factors have combined to lead to the situation where we are today, which is a situation of very severe contraction, of a high inflation rate and of the strong devaluation of the Syrian pound.
And it gives rise, doesn't it, to a war economy, effectively. And that's so many aspects of that. It becomes a cash-based society. We start talking about the sides, where they're getting funds from. The Russians are funding the Syrian government. There's talk of that. There's, who's funding the rebels and all that. It changes the whole dynamic of a country's economy.
Absolutely. To a certain extent, we can say that in large segments of the country, we are talking today of a subsistence economy. We do not have to forget that you have many border posts that are not under control of the government. You have areas under control of the government, others under control of the FSA, others under control of the Kurds. You have areas such as the coastal area, which have been spared from most of the violence. Others like Aleppo or Deir ez-Zor, where you can't talk of an economy, actually, because they're under bombing. You have kidnappings, you have lootings that are all new forms of trade. So having a clear picture of the Syrian economy today is extremely complicated. You have actually different Syrian economies to a certain extent. Now, you continue to have a state which continues to supply services, to pay salaries. Services are supplied in many urban centers, but in most rural areas, basically people are left alone to a large extent, or have to rely on either war economy or new business networks, actually.
Let's just get a quick thought from you about rebuilding the economy. I've seen Syrian opposition calling for about $60 billion needed for rebuilding. I mean, we'll never know. With this much damage there's been, the infrastructure must be in a shocking state. That's a knock-on effect towards commerce, business, all these sorts of things. The rebuilding is going to be extraordinary.
Absolutely. We are talking of billions of dollars. Luckily, many of the largest industrial concerns, such as the refineries or the power plants, have not been damaged to large extents. At least that's what I know for the moment. Now, I think one major issue when we are going to talk about the reconstruction will be that we will need to be extremely transparent. As you said, we don't really know what the amount is at this time, which is normal. But the more important thing is that when money will be poured in, we have to make sure that it goes to long-term projects, that it is well spent, that corruption is as little as possible, that people are being held accountable, because after all, the people who are going to pay back this money to donors are the Syrian people. They need to be involved in that process.
Jihad Azizi from the Syrian Report. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks to you.
We want to look at Spain now from both inside and outside the country. The economy's been shrinking now for 15 months there, and there's really no end in sight, with the recession expected to last through to 2014. Unemployment is the big problem, running at more than 25% and over 50% amongst young people. As such, many are leaving for new opportunities, places like Brazil's Rio de Janeiro. And look at where they're ending up and the impact it's having. Lucia Newman tells us that.
9 months ago, Edgar Costa left his native Spain to see Brazil. And when he was offered a job as a TV producer, he didn't think twice about staying. He bought a house, not in the famous and expensive beachfront part of Rio de Janeiro, but in Vidigal, a slum where once even the police dared not tread.
I needed a place. I knew about Vidigal. It's a favela near the main beaches. It's what Rio looks like. It's not absolute comfort, but it's changing and it's alive. That's what made me decide to be here. And of course, the main reason was the price.
Down the street, a hostel for tourists is doing a brisk trade, as more and more foreigners on a low budget are attracted to this once forbidden territory, made accessible over the last 3 years since the police began taking control.
6 years ago when I was here, I had to ask for authorization from the local drug lord, and I always knew that there were people pointing guns at me from the rooftops. Now anybody can come in here, even foreigners, and mix with the locals.
With the favelas now safer, foreigners, especially Europeans, are moving in, attracted by the 5-star view at a budget price. Here in Catagallo, Argentine Alfonso Galindez is rushing to finish a restaurant bar before Christmas. Part of an investment with Portuguese and Brazilian partners that will also include a hotel.
Alternative glam.
I'd call this alternative glam. People want to come in contact with something different. What's more interesting? To go to a hotel that looks like any other in the world, or to go back and say you stayed in a favela?
The neighbors also seem pleased.
It's marvelous. It's improving our neighborhood and countering some of the negative image that we had.
But it's not without a price. More peaceful favelas make for more expensive real estate. And with foreigners pouring in, many predict the gentrification of these favelas will drive out the original residents.
These people are offered a lot of money. Well, for them it's a lot of money. So some of them take the money and leave and go to live much further. So this is probably going to change the composition of people who live in the favelas in the long term.
Clearly this phenomena, along with all the improvements for the upcoming World Cup and the 2016 Olympics, will profoundly impact the city. The hope is that it will do so for the better.
And it's not just people moving to Latin America. Spanish companies made the move there more than a decade ago. In fact, last year, despite financial troubles at home, they invested $9 billion in the region. Take a company like Iberdrola, that is Spain's biggest power company, which operates in Brazil and Mexico. 150-year-old business, currently worth $30 billion. But just like its home country, it's trying to slash its debt. 31 billion euros at the moment, wants to get down to 26 billion. And just something else to remember to underline how bad things are in Spain. Madrid's actually still trying to plug a 24 billion euro hole in money it owes to such power companies. Well, our business editor, Abid Ali, spoke to Ignacio Galán. He is the chairman and chief executive of Iberdrola. Not just about business, but about Spain's economy in general. Abid began by asking him if he thought Spain needed a full bailout.
Bailout and no bailout, it should depend on the condition. So, but I think ensure that the Prime Minister, which is a very rational and very deep person, I ensure that he's analyzing this thing in detail, and if they are seeing them disable the country to finance as is happening. So all the financial needs are fully covered for this year and partially of next year. So I think we have not difficulties to access to the financial market. Spain is a solvent country. We have already been facing certain problems of liquidity. We now doesn't exist this problem of liquidity.
But that doesn't exist because the ECB has said that it will do as much as it can to help. And also that, you know, everybody in the markets, they expect a bailout, and that's the reason why.
Well, I'm not sure on that. I think bailout is for those countries which are not able to finance themselves.
Yeah, but so Spain needed 100 billion euros for its banking sector. There was 32 billion set aside in the budget just for the utilities as well. So if the regions need money, and you know, if you've got places like Catalonia saying, you know, we want to go separate, you've still got a problem, haven't you?
Well, I think the first thing is this 100 billion that everybody has been commenting for the banks since very many months. The fact is 37. So I think it's not 100 billion, it's 37 billion, which is peanuts. If we compare with the amount of money in other countries, like Britain has already only put it in one single bank. So Britain only in one single bank has already put it 4 times this amount, only in one bank. That is for the whole system is 37 billion, which is peanuts, I insist on that one.
During the crisis, you've had to make people unemployed, 1,200 people. But at the same time, have you seen the Spanish people, or your customers in particular, are unable to pay their bills?
I think the percentage in this moment, the unpaid bills in Spain, is less than 1.5%. I think it's the lowest of all the countries where we have already present in this moment. So the second thing, we are a Spanish company, it's true, because we have already our headquarters in Spain, but 75% of our business, of our profits are coming from abroad. So we are more British, American, so we are already in the United States. We are present in 23 states. We are the largest in Mexico. We are the largest in Brazil in terms of number of customers. We supply electricity to 40 million of Brazilians. So in terms of those redundancies, I would like to say to unemployment. I think redundancies. In a company what we employ directly 33,000 people, to have 1,000 redundancies is something which, let's say, organic. So we are not saying that beside that one, we just are employing 300 new engineers in Scotland. We are employing some hundreds of new people in Brazil. We are employing some new hundreds of people in Mexico, etc., etc. I think that is something which is happening regularly, which I think in the moment that the certain technologies is changing, the people have to adapt to the new technologies.
Okay, let's talk about the wind sector in particular. You are the world's #1 wind farm operator, and wherever you go, I mean, that's really popular with the Greens, but when you open up these wind farms onshore, when they're in somebody's backyard, people just don't like that. What are the reasons behind that?
First of all, we are not already making any wind farm in the backyards of anybody. So I think the wind farms are most of them in remote areas, which are not population.
But you do face legal disputes, especially in, I believe, in the United States, where people say, you know, the noise from these wind farms is terrible.
I'm not already aware of those things. I think we have already some comments in some countries about not the noise, just because of the risk for certain birds if they pass through close to the windmills. Those people which are living in remote areas, where there are already normally a lot of unemployment. There are not very many areas or not many business which can already create wealth or create jobs. They are coming to us to offering the land around the village, or close to the village, because that means for them wealth, that means for them jobs, that means for them even money for the town or for the village.
Let's talk about the nuclear side of the industry. Where do you see that going? Because you've got Germany, which decided that they didn't want to go down the nuclear route anymore. And a similar thing happened in Japan, but they seem to be rowing back on that. Where do you see the future for the nuclear industry?
So the politicians decide that they would like to build nuclear. If we have already, our obligation is to have the technical resources and the financial resources if they are offering the right condition to make such an investment. But we are not making the energy policy. So we are already building wind in the country where they would like to build wind. We are building hydro in the country they would like to build hydro. We are building combined cycle of gas in very many countries because they have already decided that is a great solution. And we have the technologies for making all those ones, but we are not making policy. So I think if the Germans or the Japanese or the Americans or the British or the Spaniards or whatever, they have to take the decision, the politician, what is the energy policy they would like to make in the country. How this country, what is the mix? Then the country they feel the country require for supplying the energy that the country will need in the future. And we, as a limited company, our obligation or our commitment is to deliver this energy in the right time, according with the rules, according with the mix that the governments are already defining.
Really want to kind of understand what excites you about the energy industry right now.
Well, I think we make a chart in which we make two axes. One is economical sustainability, another one is environmental sustainability. And we reach an area in which there are certain technologies which are already covering both. Means those ones which are cheapest in terms of investment, cheapest in terms of cost per megawatt hour, and those ones which are making less emission. And what those ones are they? So first is hydro, second is wind onshore, third is gas-fired power plants. I think 15 years ago, when we started with wind, it was not as competitive as it is today. We start with a small turbine of 300 kilowatts. Today, we are with turbines of over 3, 4, and 5 megawatts, so which is 10, 15 times bigger. So I think that is the move. So our obsession is to produce energy sustainable, economical, and environmentally.
And that is where we're going to leave you for this week. If you want to get in touch with the show, though, here's how you do it. You can send me a tweet if you want at Kamal AJE or to Abid as well, Abid Oliver Ali, our business editor. Email is there as well. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. You can also head, while you're online, to aljazeera.com/business. Link onto the CTC page. That's it there. All our episodes up in full for you to catch up on whenever you would like. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.